Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled People story. I've lived in my house for over 20 years now. It's nothing too fancy, just a modest single-family home in a quiet neighborhood. I bought it when I was just starting out my career, and it was all I could afford at the time. But it's been good to me over the years. The neighbors are pleasant, the area is safe, and the house has appreciated nicely in value. About 5 years ago, some folks got it in their heads to start a homeowners association. I never saw the need for one myself, but they went around getting signatures and filed the paperwork to make it official. Now we've got a homeowner association board that's supposed to oversee things like maintenance of common areas and making sure people keep their homes looking tidy. I try to avoid homeowner association politics whenever possible. As long as they don't bother me, I won't bother them. But there's this one woman on the board, Karen, who's just a piece of work. She's only been here maybe 3 years, but acts like she runs the whole neighborhood. Karen's always looking for reasons to stick her nose where it doesn't belong and tell people what to do. Real power trip kind of person, if you ask me. Anyway, last year I got a promotion at my job. It came with a nice pay bump, but it also meant I had to start traveling for work more often. I'd be gone a week or two at a time on business trips. When I was home, I was busy prepping for the next trip. My house ended up sitting empty a lot with me traveling so much. I got back from one long trip and noticed a realtor's sign in my front yard. That struck me as odd. I certainly hadn't put my house on the market. I went online and found my house listed for sale on a realty website, and at a price $40,000 below market value. I immediately called the realtor to figure out what was going on. She told me the homeowner association board had informed her the house was vacant and approved listing it for sale. They claimed since I was frequently away, they had authority to sell it on my behalf. A likely story. It didn't take a genius to realize this had Karen written all over it. She must have seen me traveling for work as a chance to force me out and get one of her people into the neighborhood instead. I tell you, that woman has some nerve. Who does she think she is selling my house without my knowledge or consent? I drove straight over to the homeowner association president's house and told him in no uncertain terms to cancel that listing immediately. Of course he played dumb, claiming he didn't know anything about it, but I knew that weasel was in on it too. Karen's got her tentacles wrapped around the whole board. I informed the president if that listing wasn't pulled down within 24 hours, they'd be hearing from my attorney. That got their attention real quick. The next day I checked online and sure enough my house was no longer listed for sale. But I wasn't done yet. This was a serious overstep by the homeowner association board. They can't just try selling off homes without the actual owner's permission. I called a lawyer buddy of mine and explained the situation. He said, because I never signed any homeowner association agreement, they had no authority over my property whatsoever. Trying to list and sell my home was fraud, plain and simple. We filed a lawsuit against the homeowner association board for deceptive practices and attempting to sell my home without consent. I asked the court to dissolve the whole homeowner association and ban those board members from any future homeowners groups. You should have seen the look on Karen's face when she got served those legal papers. She went pale as a ghost. I think she realized she finally messed with the wrong person. The homeowner association tried claiming in court that because I wasn't around much, my property was subject to their control. But my lawyer shut that down real quick. Just because I travel for work doesn't mean I surrender my property rights. The law was clearly on my side. After a month-long legal battle, the judge ruled in my favor. The homeowner association was to be dissolved completely, and Karen, she was permanently prohibited from participating in any homeowner associations ever again. Total career killer. The look of defeat on Karen's face as the verdict was read was priceless. For once, she had no snarky comeback or holier-than-thou lecture. Finally, someone had put Little Miss Homeowner Association Queen in her place. To celebrate, I threw a big block party for all the neighbors. Everyone was thrilled those bosses on the homeowner association board got taken down a few pegs. People kept thanking me for standing up to them. I gotta say, it felt pretty good being the one to finally knock Karen off her high horse. And the best part is, my property is now 100% homeowner association free forever. The court banned any future homeowner association from forming to cover my home. So I never have to worry about busybodies like Karen trying to control what I do on my own land. It just goes to show you can't let bullies like that roll over you, even if they do wear a crown that says Homeowner Association President. If you keep your cool and take 'em to court, guys like Karen always end up putting their own heads on the chopping block. Now, every time I see her around the neighborhood, I make sure to give a big wave and wink. It's my little way of silently saying, "Game over, Karen, I win." The next one is a pro-revenge story. I'm transgender, MTF 23, and I was born and raised in Tennessee, and they're not so LGBT friendly. Neither are my neighbors. Tennessee refuses to let me change my gender. Sucks, maybe one day I'll move somewhere else. IDK if that'll let me change it since I have a TN birth certificate, but that's a question for another time. Tennessee also has laws prohibiting women from going topless. Now, first off, I will not post pictures for science. Second off, I definitely have boobs. For all intents and purposes, when I go out jogging, I pass as a woman. Someone recently outed me to my neighbors, and they have replied with several nasty letters and other such stuff, calling me a gay man and other bigoted garbage. So my revenge was to jog around the neighborhood topless. I don't see the problem. They're calling me a man. The state is calling me a man. Walking around topless is allowed for men. But see, I win, because now they've called the cops saying a woman is running around topless in their neighborhood. Oh God, cover the children eyes, boobs are evil. Suddenly I'm a woman. Nice logic you got there. And then I got a call from the cops, and they wanted to talk to me. As I was so well informed due to Better Call Saul and the top of all time page from r/legal advice, I told them I was busy, and I hung up. I later got another call and did not answer. This whole thing was actually kind of obnoxious. I prefer a sports bra to hold them in place. In the end, I talked to a lawyer who thought it was hysterical, and we talked to the cops who also thought it was hysterical, and we all agreed I wouldn't do it again. Apparently, it technically is against the law, somehow, though my lawyer said he was sure the charges would be dropped. I decided not to fight it, because honestly, I didn't want to end up being held in a men's prison. A couple of my neighbors actually got my point, surprisingly, and I've made a couple friends. The rest of those grumpy bigots probably told their kids, "I'm Satan." The next one is a petty revenge story. At the Southwest Gate to board, we all were lining up per our spots in line. I was B6, my husband was seated as he was C7. A very overweight couple in their late 20s/early 30s were lined up right behind me, standing in a way to prevent people from lining up directly in front of them. I noticed their tickets said B27 and B28, because people around us looked confused when trying to line up where the rest of the upper Bs should be. And this couple was obviously in their spots. I figured they didn't know where they were supposed to be, and I told them, "Oh, I think you guys are supposed to be farther back." They ignored me. I figured they were still confused and said, "Southwest has a policy where you line up where the numbers are displayed," and they both glared at me, and the man said tersely, "We know how it works." We all board the plane with the woman at the gate, letting them on, despite the fact these a-holes are obviously cutting in line. Lo and behold, they slide into the row across from us. I'm saving the middle seat for my husband, and this spaced out, heavily perfumed lady slides into the aisle seat on our row. I'm watching the other flyers make their way into their seats, and I notice her perfume is so strong my nose starts to hurt. My husband has fairly severe asthma, and strong scents can make his allergies and asthma flare up. I can't wear perfume, lotions, etc. So I asked this woman if she wouldn't mind moving across the aisle to the cutter couple's row. She shrugs and sits next to the cutting couple as my husband comes over and sits in the aisle seat. There actually weren't many people after him, so we had the middle seat empty for the duration of the 4-hour flight, while the line cutters had the spaced-out lady nodding off with them throughout the flight. The next one is a malicious compliance story. Gather round, kids, for today I will you the magnificent tale about how our parking space was conquered. For a bit of backstory, years ago my husband and I worked for the same company in the same team. One day we received the news that our company was going to move to a much bigger building on a whole new construction site. And more good news, on the new site, there was the possibility to get a parking space from the company. This was great news for us because we just bought our own house out of the city, so we needed to drive to and from work every day. Summer came, and we all moved into the new building and made ourselves at home. We asked about getting a parking space and were told that we had to fill out an application and hand it in with HR to get one. The company only had a few spaces, so they were handed out via first-come, first-served principle. Fine with us, we immediately filled out an application and made sure we were one of the first ones to do so. Days went by and there was no news about our parking space. After 2 weeks of waiting, we contacted HR ourselves to ask about it. Imagine our surprise when we heard that we didn't get a space, because apparently we were too late to hand in our application. We immediately knew this was BS, because we filled in ours in the first week of moving in, and we heard through office gossip that there were a few people who got a space that didn't fill in an application at all. No surprise that these were the exact same people who were the boss's favorites. But hey, what is a company without some good old nepotism, right? Me and my husband were pissed. Because we didn't get a space, we had to find our own parking place every single day. The closest place to park near our building was on a nearby construction site. It was loud, dusty because construction workers were always working, and we had to walk for 10 minutes on a busy and dangerous road just to get to our office. We complained about this situation to our team lead multiple times, but her answer was always that there was nothing she could do. One day when we came in a little late, the road we always walked on was blocked and we had to make a detour. We got an earful from her for being late and we just had enough. We told her about first having to find a place to park, then having to walk in the mud to our office, and we said that we wanted a parking space. Our team lead exploded at us. "It's a bit of mud, deal with it. I don't want to hear another word about it." Then we looked at each other and thought, fine. We knew we would have our revenge. Summer came and went, and a few weeks later, the beginning of autumn announced itself. In our country, the beginning of autumn is usually accompanied with heavy winds, colder weather, and lots of rain. One particular Monday, we went to work and knew that was our moment. It had started to rain Saturday morning, and it didn't stop until Sunday night. When we arrived at our usual construction site, we knew we hit the jackpot. The rain had turned in the entire site into a wonderful mudfest, 2019. We got out of the car and sank immediately ankle deep in thick brown mud. But hey, we had a job to do, so we walked our way across the mud onto our office. Our shoes were soaking wet and completely covered with sticky mud when we walked in the building. To make matters worse, we decided that we had to go to the bathroom and then to the break room before we sat down on our desks. The expensive, brand-new royal blue carpet that was only in place for a few months was completely covered with muddy shoe prints. It was enough to make Hansel and Gretel jealous. We logged in like usual until our team lead arrived. She made a noise and a movement as if she was having a heart attack, a brain aneurysm, and a stroke all at the same time. She stormed to our desks and began yelling, "What the hell did you do to the carpet?" We calmly explained that it had rained and everything outside was muddy. And since we had no parking space, we had no choice than to drag through the mud. She weakly protested, but look at the carpet. The boss will be furious." Me and hubby looked at each other and said, "It's just a bit of mud. You told us to deal with the situation, so we did." She stared at us for a few moments, opened and closed her mouth, and was desperately thinking of something to say to us. Finally, she just let out a frustrated, and walked away. We just started working and didn't see her until late in the afternoon. We did apologize to the cleaning crew who had to clean this whole mess. It wasn't their fault that they got dragged into this, but they had to deal with the consequences. Later that day, my husband got an email from HR saying that they took another look at the parking situation, and lo. And behold, he was assigned a parking space after all. I wonder what changed their minds. The next one is an entitled people story. In a previous life, I was a nurse, and one story always sticks in my mind. I was on a discharge ward, juggling lots of patients trying to get home, some by ambulance, but the majority had to rely on relatives to come and collect them. Most relatives were fine with this, but the occasional ones made it very clear that collecting their relative was an inconvenience. We had an elderly lady come down to the unit to wait one day. She was a sweetheart, and we got on like a house on fire. I kept an eye on her throughout the day and ensured she had food and drinks. She kept apologizing for being an inconvenience to us. She told us that her son was very busy and important, and reading between the lines, it turned out that he rarely spent any time with her. "He's so busy all the time," she said. "I don't like to be a nuisance." She had been previously widowed and no other children or other relatives she could call on. It sounded like she led a lonely life, trying to be as independent as possible. This was her first time staying in hospital. As the day wore on, I could hear the increasingly desperate phone calls she was making to him trying to get collected. It wasn't hard to overhear him shouting down the phone at her that he was busy. Eventually, just before we were due to close, she called me over with an embarrassed face. "He's here," she said. Oh, good, I said. Is he on his way in? Her face reddened and she said, He's waiting in the car and told me to get to him, but I don't think I can walk that far. She looked exhausted and like she wanted to cry. Give me a sec and I'll take you to him, I said. I grabbed a wheelchair and while she nipped to the loo, I tucked a packet of sandwiches and crisps in her bag as I didn't trust he was going to look after her at home either. We got down to the entrance and she pointed out a supercar. Can't remember the type. I saw the boot open, but no one emerged from the car. I pushed her to the door and heard a gruff, Get in, from the guy in the driver's seat. I helped the lady into the car, carrying on a cheery conversation to help cover her embarrassment, but also to make a point to the son. He didn't say a word or move a muscle as I wrestled with the wheelchair and his mother and deposited her things in the boot. I said goodbye to the lady and he closed the boot with a button, revved the engine in apparent impatience, and roared out of the car park. It's not a very interesting story, and there was no comeuppance for the son, but even 20 years later, I often think about that lady and wonder how she got on. I know that we don't always know what's going on in anyone's lives, but he seemed so hard on her. The next one is an entitled parent story. I had somewhat of a revelation this weekend. I'm still processing how I feel about it and considering if I should confront my parents. Anyway, here it is. I believe my parents resent me for starting my own family. I, 40 I am, come from a big family. I'm the second oldest of 9 kids. My older sister Jane is just a year older than me. There is a 6-year gap between me and the next sibling, then my mom had a kid every 2 to 3 years. Since Jane and I were the oldest, we always helped with the little kids and the chores around the house. In fact, it was common for my parents and other adults to refer to us as Jane and OP and the kids. It's like Jane and I were not considered children. It's more like we were 2 other adults living in the house. We were homeschooled, so we were home all the time. Part of my job is that I would wake up, make breakfast for the kids, then get them started with their school or activities before I started my own schoolwork. Jane would sleep in because she was more of a night owl, and it was her job to help at night with the baby, because there was always a baby. Jane and I did most of the chores around the house. We took turns either cleaning the kitchen or doing the laundry, of which there was a lot. I did all the guy stuff, like mowing the yard and taking out the trash. As I got older, I would delegate some of these chores to my younger brothers, but it was still my responsibility to make sure it got done. Once I was old enough to drive, I would run errands and take the kids everywhere. I can't tell you how many times I would take the kids to things like play dates or doctor's appointments. I would often tuck the kids in bed and tell them stories. To me, these things were all just normal, but looking back on it, I was more like a second dad to the kids than a brother. Jane and I did have a lot of freedom as teenagers to go out with our friends if the chores were done. We didn't have cell phones back then. If we wanted to go out, we would just tell our parents we were going, and they didn't care, as long as we were back by the next morning. I moved out when I was 20, but I still spent a lot of time at my parents', and one of my younger siblings was almost always at my house. One brother, JJ, pretty much lived with me since he was 14 because he and our mom didn't get along. When JJ was 17, he got in a wreck and he called me instead of calling Dad, because I was just the one who handled those kinds of things. During all of this time, my parents always talked about how important it was for Jane and I to help with the kids, because they were so busy with their ministry. I can't count how many times I had to drop what I was doing to take care of something because Mom or Dad were counseling someone. Sorry, I feel like I'm rambling. I hope I have painted an accurate picture of my childhood. Let's move on. I had not really dated much, but when I was 25, I met and started dating Anne. We fell in love fast and got married less than a year later. My younger siblings love Anne. She is a great cook and hostess. Our house became the hangout spot. My younger siblings started calling her Mama Anne, something they still do to this day. We have now been married 15 years and have 2 kids of our own. My mom and Jane did not like Anne. Jane and Anne get along okay now, but Anne and my mom do not have a good relationship. I never understood why, but I think I have finally figured out it's because they see it as Anne having taken me away. As Anne and I focused on our relationship and started a family, I spent less and less time doing things for my parents. My dad liked Anne at first, but over the past few years their relationship has soured. Throughout the years, my dad has made comments to me about keeping up my responsibilities. One time he called me about one of the younger kids who had gotten in a fight with my mom and said, "You better get your brother and change his attitude. It's not okay how he treated your mom and you're going to make him apologize." A few years ago, Ann and I set some boundaries with my parents, telling them we were not going to raise or discipline their kids. Our home is always open to my siblings, but we no longer let my parents try and use us to straighten them up. My parents have not taken this well. About a year ago, Ann injured her foot and couldn't walk for a while. Just as she was getting better, I was diagnosed with kidney disease, which then turned into kidney failure. I've had several surgeries, with another one coming in a few weeks. It's been a rough year. During this time, my parents have not only refused to help, they have actively made things harder for us. Things like promising to help with our kids, but then canceling at the last minute, usually because something ministry-related came up. Recently, my sister-in-law, who lives in another state, had a baby, and my mom has been staying with her and helping for the past 6 weeks. My Sil has said that mom is a godsend and is so wonderful. My dad has gone to help every weekend. This hurts me because my mom wouldn't give us a single night to help with our youngest when he was born. Anyway, I'm sorry this post has turned out longer than I thought it would. I needed to get some of this off my chest. This weekend I was talking to another sister and telling her how I don't understand why mom and dad don't treat me like they do the rest of the kids, even Jane. It's like I'm not one of their children, and it just kind of hit me that they resent me for getting married and starting my own family and leaving them to raise their own kids. Part of me is relieved to finally realize why they treat me like they do, and part of me is sad. I'm kind of scared about this upcoming surgery, and I really wish I had a parent I could talk to about it, but I don't feel like I have parents. Just some people that I co-parented my siblings with. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.